everybody, welcome back to A&A Bookstore, and today Sue is back with us. Sue, can you tell me what you're doing during the week?
This week I was mostly staying at home because I had work to do.
Oh, but why? Didn't you go out to a restaurant or?
Because I had work to do.
Oh, and what are you planning to do next week?
My mom and I are planning, and my mom and I and her friends are planning to go to Thailand.
Okay. And do you like to read books?
Yes.
What types of books? The kinds of books you like to read?
My favorite genre of books is fantasy and information.
Oh, that's interesting. And could you tell me, do you like A&A Bookstore and why?
I like A&A bookstores because there's a lot of books, and when you buy a book, you donate to people who can't afford books.
Oh, that's a very good idea. Now we're going to our story. It's Jane Goodall. So here's the picture of her. And you tell the first chapter.
First chapter.
The first page. Here's the first chapter 1.
Jane Goodall was born on April 3rd, 1934, in London, England. London is one of the world's greatest cities. Jane, however, was far happier in the country. She liked being outdoors, exploring nature. Her family moved outside the city to a house with a yard. What interested her most were animals, all kinds of animals. Learning about them in books was interesting, but facts from books were not enough for Jane. Jane wanted to find out about animals by watching them herself. One time she dug up some earthworms. She came home and put them under her pillow. Jane wanted to sleep with them. Her mother explained that worms needed to be in their own homes. Little Jane was disappointed but returned the worms to the garden.
So here's a picture. Jane becomes warm. That's my turn to read. Jane was interesting in the how chicken laid eggs. So one day she went to her grandma's house, was have a chicken coop, and she went in and hide in the hay. And then she wait for like 5 hours. The hen didn't know her because she stayed so still. And then while she waiting and watching, finally the owl popped an egg from underneath the chicken. Jane was excited. Her family, however, was scared. Her mother had called the police to report that Jane was missing. But when Jane returned to the house, she did not get a scolding. Her mother understood that Jane was not being naughty. Jane's mother was called Vane. She wrote novels. Jane's father, Mortimer, was an engineer who later became a race car driver. On Jane's 4th birthday, her sister Julie was born. Imagine your sister and you have the same birthday together. It's very fun and interesting too.
The Goodall girls were young when World War II broke out in 1939 actually. Adolf Hitler was the Nazi leader of Germany and Austria. He was trying to seize control of all of Europe, including England. Right before the war, Jane's family was living in France. Her father was racing cars there. However, once the war started, the family returned to England. Mortimer joined the British Army in the fight against the Nazis. Vane and her 2 daughters moved in with Vane's mother, who lived in the seaside town of Bournemouth.
In 1943, Vane and her daughter moved in their own home in Bournemouth. Jane spent the rest of her childhood there. Jane was 8 at the time. By then, Mortimer was living apart from his wife and daughter. Jane was most happy when she was outdoors with her neighborhood dog named Rusty. She started a nature club with her sister and 2 friends. Jane had lots of rules for the club. Jane, of course, was the leader. Members had to be able to identify all sorts of different animals. Each member had a code name. The club was fun and interesting, but Jane's friends thought sometimes she was too bossy. So here's the picture with her club. By 1952, Jane's parents were divorced. Jane didn't ever lose touch with her father, but she was never lose to him the way she was with Van.
Jane was graduating from high school. Although she had been a very good student, there was not enough money for college. So Jane moved to London and took a job as a secretary.
Read that. Read this one.
In 1956, a letter came that changed Jane Goodall's life. It was from an old school friend named Chloe. Chloe's family had bought a farm in Kenya, Africa. Chloe wanted Jane to visit. Did Jane think twice about going?
Of course not. Traveling to Africa was expensive. Living in London was expensive too. So Jane moved back home with her mother in Bournemouth. She saved up money for the trip by working as a waitress. Jane was a very good waitress. She could carry as many as 13 plates balanced on her arm. So here's the picture. On March 13, 1957, Jane's African adventure began. She was turning 23 in England. She boarded a ship that arrived in Kenya 3 weeks later. Read fast.
The very first day Jane saw a giraffe, it wasn't in a cage. It was running by the side of the road. Jane was in luck. At the party, she met someone who arranged a meeting between Jane and the famous scientist Louis Leakey. He and his wife, Mary, were British citizens, but Kenya was their home.
So here's the boat of the 2 scientists and his wife. And here's a giraffe. From the moment Louis Leakey met Jane, he liked her. She had a shy manner, but he could tell she was smart and had a spirit of adventure. He offered her a job. Naturally, Jane took it. Jane worked as Leakey's secretary at a museum in the city of Nairobi, Kenya. But right away, Leakey gave her the chance to dig for fossils at Olduvai Gorge. Here's the picture. I think she's working there.
Jane had never done this type of work before. She didn't know anything about digging for fossils, but she was a fast learner. For hours every day, she picked away at the clay and rocks with small tools. Sometimes she unearthed a bone of a creature from the distant past. From Louis Leakey, Jane learned about chimpanzees. Living in the forest near Lake Tanganyika, they were long-haired chimpanzees. Leakey was interested in chimps because he believed that they had much in common with early humans. In July 1960, he moved to Gombe Stream, game reserve in what is now country of Tanzania. First, she met 2 African scouts who protected the area. Then Jane set off to take a quick look around. Her life's work was about to begin.
Life, Chapter 3, Life in the Wild. Van stayed with Jane for the first 4 months at Gombe. Mother and daughter lived in the same old army tent together. It had 2 cots and a separate area for washing up. Mosquito netting covered the front of the tent. Their toilet went outside. It was deep hole surrounded by a fence. a middle-aged woman. Living like this was hard for Jane. It had to be twice as hard for Vane. So here's a picture of their tent. Vane set up a little clinic. She provides basic health care for the local families. She hands out aspirin and clean cuts. Sometimes she helps deliver baby. So here's her small clinic. About once every 2 weeks, Jane and Vane went by boat in Kaiguma. In town, they pick up meal and food and supplies to last until the next trip. The main job of the scout was to help Jane to find her way through the forest. These forests were home of the chimpanzee. Jane, however, did not like having a scout along. Why? 2 people make more noise than 1 person alone in the forest, and noise scared away the chimps. Also, the scout didn't like to start off as early as Jane. She was always up before dawn, and often the scout wanted to head back to camp way before Jane did. So after a while, the scout let Jane explore by herself. Now she was free to go at her own pace. Sometimes she sat on the ground, sometimes she perched in the tree. She could stay overnight if she wants. Plus, being alone makes it easier to remain unseen by the chimps. Here's a picture. Read over here. She took a tin box with her too. It contained a sweater, a blanket, some food, coffee, and a mug. Jane always wore her hair in a ponytail, and she wore the same outfit every day, a tan shirt and tan shorts. Colorful clothes would make her stand out too much. She wanted to blend in with the background. Yes, often crawl, but nothing stopped Jane. Was Jane afraid of anything? Yes, she was scared of leopards. She knew the smell of leopards, and many times she caught their scent in the forest. One time she had climbed a tree to get away from a leopard. She was lucky. The leopard did not climb up after her. Instead, the leopard pooped on the rock where she was sitting. Jane couldn't always see chimps, so how did she know where to look? She knew the sounds of chimps make. Hearing certain cries tipped her off that chimps were in the area. Jane would pick out a spot and sit. She stayed there for hours, quietly waiting and watching. Some days she didn't see any chimps, even so she was sure they were watching her. Other days she saw many. Sometimes a few large males would gather together. Sometimes she spotted a mother with her young. Sometimes she caught sight of a bigger group of males, females, and young chimps. Chapter 4, The Chimps. At last, her patience paid off. It was October. Vane had gone home to England. Jane was on her own. She began exploring an area she called the Peak. Every day, rain or shine, she climbed up the steep slope of the peak into the forest. Little by little, the chimps became used to Jane watching them. One day, she saw a female hold out her hand to a male who kissed it. Jane could tell many of the chimps apart, and she gave them names. Flo was an old female chimp. Jane liked Flo a lot. She was very popular chimp, all thought to Jane at least. Flo was funny looking. She had a big round nose and torn ear. Flo had a baby. Jane called her Fifi, and she called Fifi older brother Fabian and Fegan. Thank you. Flo was a playful mother, but she was also firm. She never let her children get out of line. Oli was Flo's friend. Oli was also a female. Her face was very long and her lips jiggled a lot. Another chimp, a male, looked a lot like Oli. Jane was quite sure he was Oli's brother. She named him William. In animal studies, animals are usually given numbers, not names. In fact, many scientists think it's a bad idea to name animals that are being studied. They worry that it will make the animals seem too human. Jane definitely did not think of chimps as humans,
Frodo was one of the chimps she studied, but Frodo was a bully. Frodo started to leave, then came back, beat Jane more, and dragged her to the edge of to a cliff. What did Frodo do next? He threw her over the side. It was a steep drop, but luckily there were bushes that stopped Jane's fall. Even so, she was banged up pretty bad.
You need to look up.
In many ways, the chimps behaved like humans. Though unable to speak, they had their own means of communicating. Jane learned to tell what their different grunts, pants, and screams meant. For an example, chimps greeted each other with soft, panting grunts. A certain loud scream was a cry for help. They patted friends on the back for comfort. Did Jane have a favorite chimp? Yes. Jane called him David Greybeard because of his silvery hair around his chin. In one of her books, she wrote, David Greybeard had the most beautiful eyes of them all, large and lustrous, set wide apart. They somehow expressed his whole personality. David Greybeard had a calm nature and was not afraid of Jane. He was the first chimp who seemed to accept her.
Read. One day, Jane held out a piece of fruit to David Greybeard. He came up to her, took the fruit, and then held her hand in his. What a special moment for Jane. But one day, Jane saw David Greybeard and several other chimpanzees in the upper branches of a tree. They were grouped around something. The something turned to be the dead piglet. David Greybeard handed out a piece of meat to the other. He also let them bite of meat themselves. For 3 hours, the chimps fed on the piglet. What Jane watched proved chimps are omnivore. This was interesting news, but a couple of weeks later, Jane came upon David Greybeard doing something even more amazing. It was a day of heavy rains. Jane was tired and dripping wet. Through her binoculars, she spotted David Greybeard. He was squatting down by a nest of termites. Termites are insects that chimps like to eat. Termites' nests are like big mouths with a hole at the top. David Greybeard was poking a long blade of grass into the hole of the nest to fish out the termites. David was using the blade of grass as tool. It did a great job supplying David Greybeard with the tasty termites. Why was this so amazing? Up until 1960, scientists believed that humans were the only animal able to make tools. Making tools may not sound like such a big deal, but think about it. So here's David Greybeard using the stick. Or over here.
But Jane watched David Greybeard do exactly that. Once David Greybeard was gone, Jane went over to get a closer look at the grass tool. Jane tried to get a closer look at the grass tool. Jane tried pushing one of the nests herself. Sure enough, she could feel termites grab hold of the grass. When she took out the blade of grass, the termites were kicking their legs about. In her book's Reason for Hope, Jane wrote that it was hard for me to believe that I had seen. It had long been thought that we were the only creatures on Earth who made tools.
Read that so long.
Another time, Jane came up David Greybeard had a big strong chimp named Goodall. They were fishing for termites together, and they kept a supply of extra grass tools in case any broke. Sometimes they picked up twigs and stripped off leaves. before using them.
Chapter 5. In August 1963, Jane's first article appeared in the magazine. It was called My Life Among Wild Chimpanzees. Jane could not take the photograph for the magazine herself. It was hard enough following the chimps around with the binoculars and taking notes, but she also was not eager for the photographer to come join her. Why? She was afraid that it would disrupt her work. The chimps were finally allowing her in their midst. She was able to get much closer to them. They were sometimes only yards away. In time, David Graybeard began coming up to the camp to visit. He'd take handfuls of banana from Jane. Soon, other chimps came too. If strangers suddenly appeared on the scene, the chimps were sure to fearful and hide from Jane again. All the trust she had built would be destroyed. Jane's suggestion was for her sister Judy to join her in Gombe. Judy would take photos. Jane and Judy look a lot alike. Jane figured that the chimps might accept her sister. Having Judy company was very welcome. The two sisters would go off together into the forest.
Jane continued watching the chimps while Judy took photos. The trouble was Judy's photos weren't good enough for magazines.
Skip some of them.
She took pictures of two chimps in a fight to become a group later. Her photos were wonderful. In 1963, National Geographic magazines ran an article about Jane and the chimps. It was the first of many. Louis Leakey was very happy that such a famous magazine recognized the importance of Jane's work. However, Louis wanted the scientific world to accept Jane as an expert on chimpanzees. The fact that Jane didn't have a college degree worked against her. So Louis Leakey helped to get Jane admitted to Cambridge University in England.
Let's get some heart. Where do you read it?
Start right there.
Jane was allowed to study for an advanced degree. Cambridge decided that her work with the chimps counted as a college degree. Of course, studying at Cambridge meant being gone for a part of the year from Africa. Every day away was hard for Jane, but by 1965, Jane completed all the work for her doctorate. She was now Dr. Jane Goodall. In London, on March 28, 1964, Jane was married to Hugo van Lodwick. On top of the wedding cake was a little clay model of David Graybeard. On the walls hung picture of David and Gall's Flo and her daughter Phoebe and many of James Hugo's other chimp friends. Skip some of these parts. It's 24 minutes already.
Among the females, Flo was the most respected. In 1964, she had another baby. Jane and Hugo called him Flint. They didn't know whose Flint's father was. Male and female chimps do not pair off and live together, nor does a male chimp take part in raising his young. In 1966, an outbreak of polio swept through the forest of Gombe. It killed several chimps and left others with crippled arms. Polio is the disease that can also strike humans, but since the 1950s, there has been a vaccine to prevent it. Flo managed to avoid polio, but in August 1972, old age caught up with her. Age wrote a letter to her family that Flo had died. In it, she said, "I've known her for 11 years and I had loved her." Flo was probably around 50 years old when she died. Her youngest Flint was 8.5 years old by then. He was a strong and well past childhood, but he could not bear a life without Flo. 3 days after her death, Jane saw him staring at Flo's empty nest. Flint stopped eating. He stopped traveling with the group. Instead, he stayed by the spot where Flo had died. He soon fell ill. There is nothing Jane or the students could do to help Flint. His death on September 15 was heartbreaking. In 2012, on television show 60 Minutes, Jane said that first she had thought chimps were like humans, only nicer. Perhaps she had Flo and David Graybeard in mind when she said that. However, the longer she remained among the chimps, the more she saw of her early ideas about them were wrong. Chimps had a very dark and violent side, just like humans. Then there was passion. Jane had observed passion for years. Passion seemed to not have an ounce of kindness. She neglected her daughter, Pom. It was pitiful to watch. Little Pom begged for her mother's attention. Uncaring was one thing, but in 1974, Passion did something so awful, the researchers of Gombe were stunned. Gilka had just given birth to an infant daughter like Flo. Gilka was a loving mother. She was sitting in the sun, cradling her tiny newborn, when all of a sudden, Passion appeared without warning. She charged at Gilka. Gilka tried to escape, but polio had crippled her hands. She could not run fast enough. Passion snatched Gilka's baby, and after killing it, fed on it until every last bit was gone.
Then in 1986, Jane attended a conference with other scientists who study chimps. They discussed an alarming issue. Unless steps were taken, wild chimps might come to extinct. One day, there simply could be no more of these amazing creatures left. Jane began a program called Take Care. Through it, more than 1 million trees have been planted in Africa to bring shrimp forests back to life. Take Care also helped people living near chimps group improve their lives. Another of Jane Protect Chimpanzee was started to improve the lives of chimps in zoos. Jane saw that they needed larger space and homes. They were more like chimp homes in wild. Today, Jane still has a house in Tanzania. But Jane comes to Gombe only twice a year for a short visit. She spends 300 days a year traveling around the world, giving talks to many people aware from the causes that are most important to her. Jane's mother, Van, who died in 2000, always encouraged her daughter to follow her dream. So it seems entirely fitting that Jane would want to do the same for her children today. In 1991, a group of 16 local African teenagers met with Jane and started the first Roots and Shoots Club. Roots and Shoots clubs are for kids who like young Jane, want to learn about animals as well as ways of protecting them. Now there are Roots and Shoots club in more than 120 countries.
And to think it all started with a funny toy chimpanzee named Jubilee.
Finish. Thank you for watching our video today. We wish you a nice weekend with your family. Always be happy and always watching my video. If you like it, give it a like, comment down below, subscribe to it, and watch on YouTube if you like it. Bye for now. Bye.
Bye.